ladies and gentlemen. We're going to, before we start this council meeting here at Weyburn Chamber of Commerce at 5 o'clock here January 8th, so I want to welcome you to the new 2018 year. Listening to some of the comments as led up to this and as 2018 came in, the basic comment was that held by many people that the winds of change are upon us and they're starting to blow quite readily. So with that, we are challenging you to set our sails in the direction that this council wants to take the city. So let's not look towards only this year, 2018, or to 2019, 2020, into the election years, but let's look into further down the way. What do we want Weyburn to look like in 2020? What do we want Weyburn to look like 2030, 2040? So with this in mind, I challenge each and every one of you to think to which way we wish to set our sails to the new year and into the future. Bringing that, I call this meeting to order. I have the Weyburn City Council in the council chambers at 5 p.m. Monday, January 8th, 2018. The first order of business, the approval of minutes of the regular council meeting and the strategic planning priorities meeting held December 11th, 2017. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll make that motion, Your Worship.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Discussion? Call to question? All in favor? Are there any additions to the agenda?
No, Your Worship.
Any other? With that, we wish to move forward on to here. One of the things I wish to make note of, that I'd like to welcome our new engineer. If you would introduce yourself, please, sir.
My name is Nader Kishta. I'm the new city engineer. My background is civil engineering. I did a PhD in University of Saskatchewan. That's pretty much everything.
Everything. Well, we welcome you to our city staff. We welcome you to our city in itself, and we look forward to working with you here, both in council and within the city. Mr. Hardy is looking forward to working with you. So with that, let's move forward to public hearings and notices. There's none. At this time also, we have the original communications and delegations. We have the Weyburn Golf Club delegation. We wish to have you speak to us. Dr. John Corrigan will be speaking today. You can introduce yourself again. And
Okay. Dr. John Corrigan, President of the Weyburn Golf Club. Joining me today is our Vice President, Craig Robson, our General Manager, Brett Berkner, and our Superintendent, Lachlan Reeve. Your Worship, Mr. Mayor, members of council, thank you for inviting us here today to discuss the proposal that we presented to you at your last council meeting. Just to begin with, just to touch on a few things regarding the proposal. As we had discussed in our previous appearances before council on another topic, one of the questions that was brought to us was, what are big ticket items? And at that time, it was obviously our irrigation system. And that has been a high priority for us for a number of years. Without doing the irrigation system first, even though we have a number of other projects that we need to do, we can't do those until the irrigation system is done. It is a big ticket item. But our current irrigation system on the older 9 is probably approaching 40 years old. On the newer 9 is approaching 30 years old. This is a facility that next year in 2019 celebrates its 100th year in the community. So a lot of the things that we have are in need of replacement. A golf course is always looking to improve its facilities and move forward. But without that irrigation system, doing a new green, planting trees, whatever it might be, would be simply impossible and a waste of money without having that proper irrigation. So our proposal, as was presented to you, is an interest-free loan in the amount of $900,000. As far as how we restructure that, how we pay that back, we would be putting our land and buildings up as collateral for that loan. The value amount of that is approximately $1.2 million. We proposed a consistent repayment plan annually of a minimum of $20,000 with additional payments based on how we are doing in that current fiscal year. So for instance, to just use an example, if we had a year, an extraordinary year where we made $100,000, we need to come to an agreement as to what percentage of that would go back to that loan, you know, whether it would be 50%. So in a year where we made $100,000, we'd make an additional payment of $50,000 in that year. Now, certainly all these numbers are negotiable. These are just what we put into our proposal. By structuring it this way, it allows us to continue to still make improvements to the golf course, the things that we need to do. If we had gone to a financial institution to take this loan out with the interest payments and the payments that would have to be made on an annual basis, it would make it almost practically impossible for us to operate and to make any sort of course improvements that we need to make. We have a lot of members and a lot of people within the community and area that use this facility and use it for fundraising activities also. We want to keep that golf course in as good a shape as we possibly can. This past year was a difficult year. I mean, considering the weather, it was dry, it was hot. And it really showed the deficiencies in our current irrigation system. Areas that weren't getting appropriate water, appropriate irrigation. It was a real challenge for Locke to keep the course in as good a shape as he was able to do. But it came out okay. But with the new irrigation system, it would have looked significantly better. We would be able to move forward with more of our plans for tree planting, improving the aesthetics of the golf course, and the playability. Are there any questions?
Michael.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, thank you very much for coming to the city again, John, and your executive. The question I have for you is, this infrastructure problem didn't happen overnight. It happened years ago. Was any money in your organization put into reserve for that day?
We were doing that.
But not now.
Not now.
Previously.
Yeah.
So you had this serious problem coming up.
Yeah.
And there was no money set aside for this problem.
Well, unfortunately, the tax situation that we had discussed previously, because of the decisions that were made regarding that, depleted our reserve fund.
You mentioned in one of your statements that it is negotiable.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
$900,000 is a pretty handsome sum.
Definitely.
And I want to make it clear, and maybe this is just my opinion, the city of Weyburn does not want to own a golf club. But by giving collateral, that's a dicey situation. However, I think something can be worked out. But I guess the question I ask, do we want to debate this in open council, or should we have a meeting and discuss some terms?
As far as the negotiation aspect of it, I would suggest not an open council to be able to come to some sort of agreement. And I agree with you. $900,000 is a significant amount of money. And I understand. I mean, we've been down this road already, that the city does not want to own the golf course.
Right.
But with that said, we felt it important to put something up for that loan. It's still a loan.
Right.
And in that regard, it protects the ratepayers' money. You know, it's not a gift. It's not something that we can just walk out the door with. I believe that the ratepayer needs to be protected also. And by setting up a program as far as repayment goes and having that collateral there, it puts the onus on us to make sure that we are paying that debt off.
Thank you, John.
Okay?
Mr. Richard.
Thanks, Your Worship, and thanks, John, for coming and doing this again. Just a couple of, I agree with you in everything you said. The golf course is an important asset. We got to have a golf course. I agree with you. That's not negotiable. We have to have a golf course here in our city. My question is, glad also, like Councillor Mickle said, that you're saying we can start to negotiate stuff. But secondly, have you gone to the RM with this, with a similar request to help pay for, because your taxes actually are payable to the rural municipality. So just a question, if you've had a conversation with
We have not.
Sorry?
We have not.
You have not.
No.
Do you expect to?
We thought we'd come here first.
Okay. That's a fair answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Bailey?
Thank you, John. Probably of the group of us here, you'll probably see my face out there more often than anyone. So I think the importance of the golf course too is hugely. The $900,000 with the payback proposed takes 45 years to pay it back if there wasn't any excess
Correct.
throughout those years.
Yeah.
To me, that's
Excessive.
that can't work. So we have to get down to the meat and bones on this and stuff. I've often said to you in private and that I still think our golf course fees are one of the cheapest going around the country for what we have for a facility in our community. And so I would hope that the golf course would look at that. And I think the membership there is roughly 300. Am I correct in assuming that?
Fluctuates between that, a little higher than that.
A little
yes.
higher? Okay,
Yeah.
so if you ballpark this at 300 and you ask me for an extra $100 a year in my membership and take that and put towards this infrastructure loan, all of a sudden now it changes from $30,000 to $50,000.
Right.
And so that really sets a different tone, you know, for negotiations if I would ask that the golf course look at doing something that in their budgeting. And I don't know if that 50 is the magic number or anything like that, but it's just an example of what I wanted to put forward to you. Have you had any consideration with your board on doing something like that?
Well, Winston, we examine our fee structure annually and determine what the marketplace will bear as far as increases and that aspect, not only with memberships, but with green fees and everything else. It's a touchy situation.
Understand.
Yeah, and not one that we take lightly, because yes, you can increase fees, but the thing that you have to take into consideration then is, are you increasing to increase your revenue, or are you going to have that same number drop off? And then you end up with the same amount of revenue anyway. So we have on an annual basis increased based on cost of living increases and that sort of thing, and even a little bit higher in some areas. But annually, we do make some increase. Now, with that said, what you're saying is accurate. If we could message it in the right way, then I think that the membership would probably be a little bit more receptive to the concept and the idea.
I think the term I like to use on this, you have to sell it. and I think that's negotiations to come along further. But
Yeah.
that's just one example where I think you're underselling your facility.
Okay.
That's my personal take.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Mr. Banagher.
Thank you, John, and I appreciate you bringing this item to council. I think it's great that council gets to hear the point of view from the golf course, their stance, and I think it's great that the residents of Weyburn also, at this point, get to hear where the golf course is coming from and what they have plans. I do think that it is something that should definitely be taken into private and discussed at roundtable discussions, and I think we should probably, I would like to see us set up a meeting with the golf course executive in the near future, but have it so, I don't know if preliminary talks are necessary with our city administration or not, but so that we come to the table with options that we can all look at so that we can expedite this so that, again, a year from now, we're not still discussing it.
Right.
And hopefully, if
Yeah.
there is a decision to be made one way or the other,
Right.
that decision can be made, and that we can come back to council with some options and some to discuss in open.
Yeah.
So I would like to suggest that we table this and then someone get back to yourself and we set up a meeting.
Just before you start into that, the one comment, and I know that, be it, first off, who actually owns the golf course? Because there's, as we started into this new council, and as we have, there's been some long-time agencies that have been floating around, or organizations that have been floating around the city for the last, since 1950, and like you said, since 100 years now coming up. And there becomes these questions as who actually owns the title of property on that land?
That's the Weyburn Golf Club nonprofit corporation and the members of that corporation.
So they have shares.
They're not shares, they're memberships within a corporation.
So you are a corporation, a nonprofit corporation?
Nonprofit corporation,
but,
yes.
With memberships,
Correct.
where you could go back to your memberships and ask for loans from them. Like a corporation, right?
You could.
Yeah, good.
Yep.
And out there. And I guess it gets down to the problem is that we're beginning, and I put this to the council, as you said, you wanted to sit down and discuss all this stuff and doing as to what you're doing, that we were, as a city, and again, we're going through our budget here, and I'm looking at it on a budgetary, saying that this is this an appropriate time to be even talking about this, in the sense that we are being hit with a bunch of things. First off, we had our $1.5 million or $9.6 million has been cut from our budget completely by the province. We have to make up that shortfall on as to what we were doing. And we're going to be reeling from that. We're going to be having to look at what they're going to be doing. Swift Current and their expectations put up their taxes. By no means are we ever looking at what Swift Current did, but they went up 13.7% because they had to do something just to run their city. Our city taxes only pay for 20 to 30% of what we actually work at. The rest we hold from the government. So we ourselves, because of past, and be it past what is done in the past, we have failing infrastructure that we have to replace. We have to replace streetlights downtown. That is going to cost us whatever we have to do onto that, on how many, whether it's $1 million or not on there, but we have lights that are out completely downtown. That has to be all taken care of and done onto there. We have to do a project. We're replacing sewer from 7-Eleven all the way down to Government Road. We pulled out meters. We paid for water. We have now got lead-free city, no lead pipes. We are building a $20 million reservoir project. Plus, there's other projects that we are looking at. At the point in time, as we set as a priority-based budget onto there, I think the question is more so, is this a priority when the golf course, although it is a part of our community, is sitting in the RM, is this a part of the city's priorities that we have to look at, because it is not even a part of our city proper. It is an RM that is there. Mr. Bencher.
I don't disagree, Your Worship, that we have, there's certainly a lot of expenses, and we do have a lot of items on our agenda that we do want to pay for, but I also believe the golf course is an important part of this community, and I think we need to sit down with them to see if we can work out a solution to their problem. Whether that be yes or no, I'm not sure myself, but I think it would be totally unfair to not at least sit down and have some serious negotiations and not let it drag so that next year they're wondering yet, well, maybe this year's the year that the city will do it, or maybe next year's the year that the city will do it. Let's sit down and have some serious talk and figure it out whether it can work or not.
Mr. Mickle.
Thank you, Worship. The golf course is a very important part of this community, and I think and Worship, what you say about our projects, what are happening, I totally agree with you. And there's always roadblocks, but I think the golf course has been on hold long enough. And I think we have, as I said, the golf course is an important part. I don't care if it's in the RM or not. It draws people to our community and makes it sustainable. I think we have to sit down with the golf club. Let's compromise, as the chairman said. And I think there is room for compromising to make this thing work. And I don't think we can wait until everything is done in the city, because it'll never get done. I think the golf course is important, and we should get at this meeting very soon.
Mr. Richards.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll echo Councillor Van Betju and Councillor Mickle. We said that what we want to do as one of our strategic priorities is to, at the very least, maintain our top 5 status in Canada, or top number 1 as a place to live, if not improve on that. And the golf course is a piece of our recreation infrastructure, and I agree 100% would be irresponsible of us to just close the door or close the book on this. I think we owe it to everybody to have a conversation.
And with Mr.
Your Worship, I'll agree with my past councillors and strongly agree with Mel. I think as a whole, you guys have been waiting long enough, whether it's tax issues and questions. So let's have a discussion. I'd like to see myself, if we're going to do this, let's do this in the next 30 to 45 days. Let's not wait until their season's already started and they're busy at that point. Let's bite this now and get it handled. And if we can make something work, great. If maybe there is some other avenues, whether it is a discussion, as you mentioned, with the RM or whatever it may be, but at least let's get it on the table and figure out what kind of priority it is.
If you gentlemen are in agreement that this, for the future of Weyburn, and just as a different, from hockey rinks to community centers, that the golf course is a part of it, then I guess if we'll ask for a resolution that we sit down and do our negotiation, if this is what we feel that the golf course is actually a part of our future and our future vision that we have. Resolution?
Yeah, I'll make that motion, Your Worship.
Or where,
Councillor Betju already had one on the
did you? Go ahead, Mr. Van Betju.
No, just a table, and that was it, but I think we can change that maybe to
Resolution?
have a resolution that city council set up a meeting with the golf club executive to sit down and or discuss
The future of the golf club.
the loan.
The proposal?
And proposal, yes.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Carried unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
There are no reports, council. There is no consent agendas. We now look at motions. We have the accounts payable.
Worship, I'd like to make the motion that the purchases in the amount of $2,605,963.31 from December 7th to December 29th, 2017 be passed for payment.
Your
Second.
Worship, I'll second that motion.
Call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Development charges policy. Mr. Hardy.
Thank you, Your Worship. We are still moving forward, I believe, in terms of our direction on development charges. And what I have attempted to do, given Council's general direction, was I've tried to frame an alternate methodology, or at least define more specifically how to deal with certain properties by the development of a development charges policy, which is in front of Council. And primarily the changes that I have put forward to Council is I have helped provide some definitions which aren't already within the current bylaw, but I've also designed the concept upon which charges would be based on what is called, what we're referring to as the development area, which includes all of the areas that basically when a proposal comes in, it's those areas in which are being developed or that are required under our zoning bylaw to be changed or made compliant with the zoning bylaw. In order to do this, though, I think the advantages to the city are that the city and to proponents is that notwithstanding whatever size of a lot you have, in terms of calculating development charges, it's working on the area that is really actually being developed. So it doesn't include areas like storage areas and those types of things which would not be considered, well, are not developed at the end of the day. And so looking at this, basically what I've done is identified this development area as the area within a parcel of land that would be used for the calculation of the development or for the development charges. Further to that, the policy also identifies that where, and there's an example which is given there in terms of how the general base calculation of development charges are done. The second piece is that in terms of looking at some of the smaller development areas which are in place of less than a fifth of an acre or 0.2 acre. In effect, that there's a charge that would be used in that area, which is basically for the provision of services to that development. So that for example, if there was any type of improvement in the terms of of an existing property or redevelopment of a property, that the maximum charge of $15,287 would be applied to that as opposed to square footage or those types of things. So in effect, where there are some minor adjustments to the development area or redevelopment, that there would be restricted in terms of what those costs would be. So we're really trying to narrow it down to, instead of using the whole parcel of land, using the parcel that's going to be directly impacted by development. I think that's an improvement over what we've had in the past. And secondly, that in effect, what we're doing is that we have also tried to identify within the policy, basically the principles on which an adjustment could be justified or basically exempted. So that, for example, in terms of the areas, in terms of the 5 categories that are on which the development charge is based, basically what we're saying is that where there is, as an example, where there is no planned or actual or planned connection to water supply or sanitary sewage, those charges would not apply. Where there is, where you're in proximity to the existing storm and drainage system, you're going to pay for that because that, in effect, you're going to get the benefit of. And then in the area of transportation, generally the road improvements are ones which basically is about access and is something that everybody should be in most positions be able to pay for as part of the off-site development fees. And then Parks and Recreation, basically I'm suggesting that in terms of where there is a benefit as a result of a development that's going to add new employees or new residents, that as an example, a commercial operation would be responsible for that charge. So that if, for example, somebody was coming in, a new property was developing, let's say a box store was coming in, it was going to create 50 new jobs. Well, then the issue is that where it is creating jobs, that's also going to create an impact on our system. And as off development charges, because the city has put into place, has a great leisure system, including a golf course and potential other amenities, that basically that development coming into town would make a contribution towards the development charges because they're getting the benefit of that great quality of life that we're talking about. So what in doing this, basically what I've done is put in place a policy as to how we would deal with it. Now, the other piece of this, in terms of the bylaw, and I've basically adjusted the bylaw to include the policy instead of putting this all in the bylaw. So there's an adjusted bylaw which is attached to the end of the policy that gives you a sense of what would change as a result of this. But the other piece that I think that's important in terms of what we have at this point around a development charges bylaw is that we have a process as well. We just don't have the policy, we just don't have the bylaw. We also have the process by which we're going to be able to take certain aspects, certain developments, certain properties that are already in half development stage, and have the ability to have the Economic Ad Hoc Committee hear from proponents who want to see, what is going to be that impact. So it's not a straight, this is what's going to happen. We do have some situations which are going to require a little bit of review and tweaking. So I think the fact that the bylaw has in it the ability for the ad hoc committee to review these when requested is providing enough safeguard that we follow through on what council wanted, which was to make sure that development charges are fair, are appropriate, and are being applied consistently across the system, and that we're taking into consideration marginal improvements or redevelopments and looking only at that marginal piece and making sure at the end of the day that we're not having an 8 by 10 building resulting in, on a 1 acre property, resulting in a $76,000 charge for development fees. We're looking at what that size is plus whatever is needed to be around that and using that as the basis for our calculation. I think that is more effective, it's more fair, and I think as the policy is interpreted and it's still at the end of the day going to be the ad hoc committee that is going to be able to make recommendations to council under certain circumstances. But I think this is what we've done here is we've made it a little more, we've defined it a little better based on some input that we got from the last meeting we had, and believe we have the process in place that will support the council's direction in moving this forward.
Van Betje. Go ahead, Mel.
Thank you, City Manager Hardy. I just wonder, so Councillor Richards and I have discussed this at length last week a little bit, and we came up with a few changes, or not changes or whatever, suggestions that we thought we'd like to make, but I wonder if it's possible to move it to strategic planning. I just think it's possible to discuss at open council, not that there's anything, but just the back and forth is so difficult. So I was just, yeah, and I just wonder if we can move this to our strategic planning meeting after council tonight and hash this out finally and finish it. But I just think in open council, it's very hard to have the open dialogue.
We can table this until the next council meeting or to the next council. You're making a motion to table it?
Yeah. Do we need to make a motion to move this to strategic planning?
You can refer it to strategic.
Refer it to strategic. I would like to make a motion that we refer this to strategic.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Seconds motion.
Thanks, Your Worship. My question was just of procedure here. Was this open to input from the public again tonight? I just want to make sure if it is, we offer that opportunity. If not, then fine. Okay.
This is policy over bylaw. So, all in favor of moving to strategic planning? On to the next. Bi-weekly refuge collection policy.
Yes. Nader, would you like to?
Sure. Some families have brought forward to the concern that the bi-weekly refuse collection is difficult for them, so they requested an alternate solution for the procedure we are using. So we are proposing that we will provide them with an extra bin at no cost from their side, and they will be held accountable for this bin unless they move from their address. They have to return it back to the city. And we are proposing that a definition for those bigger families or that will benefit from this modification, that families which are more than 7 persons.
7 plus or 7 up or
7 plus.
7 plus.
Yes.
Like that. Mr. Van Betje.
I just have a couple questions. I was wondering how you came up with the number 7.
Sure. Your Worship, I'm probably better, and we'll have a little back and forth every once in a while as we're doing these things. But primarily, we looked at 7 is that we looked at where where the general cutoff was in terms of what was the family size that would do it. We had some basic information that identified that at this level, there was no doubt that there was going to be an issue. And so we used that higher number because basically it was the only case that we had that could demonstrate to us that was an appropriate level. And I think the other thing is keeping in mind that what we want to do is we want to ensure that recycling still takes place, and that we don't want to make this a habit. This is an exception. And we're just saying at this point in time, we have a demonstrated need at this level.
And the other question, and I don't know whether, I don't imagine at 7 that we're going to have a whole lot of families out there that size. One thought that I had was, the additional bin, but then thinking a lot of people don't have room for an additional bin. Would it be also possible to continue with the weekly pickup for that person? And the truck would be in one zone anyway, so it would just have to go over to the other zone? Or is that asking too much?
That's really making it too much. And I think the issue is we want to deal with the exceptions fairly, but they have to be, they have to be real exceptions for us to want to change the policy in terms of doing that. If we're going to have biweekly pickup, we're going to have biweekly pickup. That's where, and I mean, in looking forward, a lot of the results of this first 6-month period of looking at this, we will have an opportunity to look at it further, and for staff to report back on what the results were, particularly in terms of identifying whether or not that period should be longer or shorter, or whether or not eventually we look at the integration of services in both our recycling and our garbage pickup.
Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, I just have one more point, sorry. I just hope we contact this resident, or how many residents there are, because we made it very clear to the public that we would do whatever needed to be done to make it work for the residents. And I heard that loud and clear, and I was told that loud and clear by many residents. So I hope we don't push a solution on residents that is not workable. And we do have options, and if it puts the city in a little bit of a inconvenience for 5 or 10 residents, then I think I'm okay with that.
Mr. Bailey? Nader?
We have total around 12 complaints about this issue, and only 2 families of them are more than 7. So it's not that obvious, but we have to work around it to solve it.
Mr. Bailey?
Yeah, that was my question. How many people have come forth to say, I need more?
Yeah.
And I mean, I had 2 calls on it, and I think if we throw the extra can for them, that's going to be their issue to have a storage or whatever. So how many more? How many applications? How many people have called?
Through you, the Director of Engineering indicated that we had about 12 inquiries in total.
Richards? Go ahead.
Thanks, Your Worship. You'll know that I'm pretty big on evidence-based decision-making. So if this is the process that we think is going to solve this issue for these, not a big number of residents, I'd like to see us do some work around this. And I've been watching this. I've been watching the garbage trucks come. I've been watching the recycling trucks come. They can see these bins when they go in. I'd like us to mark the additional bins somehow. Every one of those bins has got a little white box where I'm supposed to write my house number on there, right? I know they all have that. I'd like to see these additional bins also marked that somehow as it's an additional bin for that house, so that, and here's why I say that, I would like a piece of paper, if we're talking about 6 people that this is going to impact, it's not laborious for the driver to say, okay, I'm at house number 1 of 5, both bins are full, but, and he's not going to know this, there's no recycling. So we're going to have to be We're going to have to be communicating with our service provider there, and I like what you're talking about, City Manager, about some integration of those services, because we have to make sure we're doing a fulsome look at this. I don't want to just, because I'm going to phone you next week and say, I'm going to need a bin too. Exactly. Right? So we got to make sure that we're putting some metrics around this and make sure that we're measuring the outcomes, because we're going to just end up putting bins at a lot of houses that find this inconvenient, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I could add to Councillor Richards' adjustment, and that's what we are doing. We did, for those who could clearly demonstrate to us what the need was, we have said, yes, this is the process. But you're right. We didn't want the situation where everybody said, well, if it's easy for me, then I'll do this. We also have some home-based businesses that could ask for a second bin, yet what we're talking, this is a residential garbage program. So the question then becomes, for some of those home-based businesses, if they need the second container to deal with the garbage from their home-based business, well, the question is, should generally the city or city taxpayers be subsidizing the provision of that extra level of service? So we are using more evidence-based, and as I said, the issue for us is after we've had this initial period this winter, then we will come back to council with any sort of recommended changes, what our observations are, and I appreciate the recommendation that was given about where we have put in this second bin, that we just do a bit of monitoring around the usage.
Mr. Wheeler.
Yeah, I personally have had about 4 or 5 people come to me and complain, all of them being young families of 2 or 3 more children, and I kind of can see where they're coming from. They have a lot more going on in their lives, and they generate a lot more refuge, I guess. And I am sympathetic to that, and I think it needs to be really looked at, because I have a few of them living on my street, and I see what they go through, and I know their recycle bins are overflowing every time, and so I think it needs to be looked at, because it is an inconvenience for them, because they're storing garbage in their garages and anywhere they can until they can get rid of it. So.
Mr. Hardy?
And it would be appropriate for those individuals to get in contact with us directly, so that we can do a bit of that monitoring and confirm, and then that helps us with making recommendations at the end of the winter.
Mr. Chesson?
I guess my question is, Roy, do they have the option for refuge or for recycling? Because as Brad just mentioned, the recycling's overflowing. It's not the garbage. But that's my question. Or would we be better pushing 2 recycling bins? Or as the person calls in, do we give that an option? Yeah. You can have 2 recycling, 1 refuge.
Yeah, I think that's...
It's costing us either way.
I think that's what this first period is going to allow us to do. It's going to allow us to review that and make that, and be able to make that call. I think that that's what we're going to be able to do is we have asked people that if they are in this situation to keep track of it, because we will take their information at the end of the 12-week period. For some, that might be inconvenient, but one of the reasons why we're doing it in the winter is we would have less because there's no odors, there's no pests, there's less pests, etc. This is the time to get a sense of what that number should be. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important, even for councillors and for individuals who have these circumstances, keep track of that, keep a record of that, and by all means, send it in to us and keep us apprised of that information as we start moving through it. Based on what we've seen to date, the 7 number is what we have demonstrated proof of that occurring. And that's what we need, is we need basically a little bit of that evidence, and so we're hoping that people will collect that information and pass that on directly to staff. That would help us. That will help us.
Mr. Van Beschen, any more questions? Any more comments?
No, I think all the questions have been answered, but I just hope that, there is only a few families out there that are going to be, that's 7 plus, and that we do stay in contact with them and help them to make it work for them also.
Mm-hmm.
The comment about the 7 families is simply that this is policy. This is not bylaw. Policy can be changed quite quickly on the fly and adjusted onto there. It wasn't looked at that you would do an extra charge on this, and the reason why I say an extra charge for the bin, because again, there's two reasons usually deter if this is, are you doing this? And just simply, they're not going to, because they got the extra bin, they're going to start flipping recycling stuff in there that isn't there. But at the same time, the problem we have with this recycling is there's a lot of people that have wishful recycling too that they're doing, thinking that this pizza box is recyclable when really it isn't. It should be going in the garbage. And you've got a lot of other things onto that. And the other comment is that with this, if user pay sort of thing, that's a way of deterring people from just saying, I want a free garbage bin, and I want a free extra one. The purpose that we had as council, I believe, that we went forward with having a bi-weekly pickup is simply for cost savings and making the city more efficient on that. And we're asking the rest of the residents, be efficient also too in your lives here. We're asking for efficiency along the way, both for our landfill and for our recycling. Let's be efficient in what we're doing and how we're working our garbage. Mr. Van Bitch.
I just want to add on about the pizza boxes. That pizza boxes are recyclable as long as they're stained.
Yeah.
That's fine, but they can't have food, leftover food in them.
No.
But the box itself is recyclable, even if it's only stained. And I'll just bring another note in for jars and whatnot that you're recycling. They just have to be lightly rinsed, but they do have to be rinsed. They don't have to be cleaned perfectly or anything like that.
Or the
just
label taken
lightly
off?
rinsed.
Do the labels have to be taken off?
No, they do not, no.
Or the cans? Do the labels?
No,
cans
they
have
do
to-
not, no.
Okay.
Through you, Your Worship, these are the areas in which we can refine and make better communication as we move through this process. We are still relatively young at this. We don't have a year under our belts yet. But I think what it allows us to do is once we've gone through this winter period, we're going to be able to look at some of these things and say, okay, how do we need to revamp our communications? How do we need to look at our service delivery and make any adjustments to it? And this is a good way, as opposed to waiting until we have all the answers. This is one way of actually stepping in, getting it out there, and instead of the question being asked, well, what if, let's take some time to pilot it and then see what it is. But let's generally say that, let's follow through on where we want, or a good recycling program and a good garbage program. We want to do that, and first way we got to do that is we got to get out there and get a little bit of better information on what it really looks like once we have gone from just a garbage and then a depot recycling versus curbside recycling, and then we just use that information to make the program better.
Mr. Chessel?
Just to make it clear too, Roy, the second bin is only during those bi-weekly periods. This would not kick in July, August, right? Just for the residents. So
well,
they know.
for what
there's
we're
no
doing, what
confusion.
we're doing at this point, that's right, because the issue is still for us at the end of the day. We're going to have to look at it in 12 weeks. And while we have extended this now, that would be, again, part of the discussion that we will have in the spring as to where we're going from here. What now beyond this 12 weeks, how are we going to deal with the situation of the larger families? How are we going to deal with the situation of the home-based businesses? How do we do with that? So I think that's where we will come back and review this in 4 months' time and figure out how we're going from here, making the adjustments. And if we have to do this, if we do this review once every 6 months for the first year and a half of the program, we're going to have a better program, and we're going to know where we need to take it.
So the call to question is there someone who wishes to accept this policy? Make a resolution.
Your Worship, I will make the recommendation of the engineering assistant Delaney to allow households with 7 or more family members residing in a single dwelling to be provided a second refuge collection bin upon request, with the condition that their curbside recycling bin is being utilized regularly.
Second.
Worship, I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion? If not, call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Introduction of bylaws. Bylaw development levy, off-site development levy. Mr. Hardy.
Your worship, I wish that the third reading be tabled until we have our further discussion at strategic planning. So at this point, I just basically would ask that council defer on that. Just table the table.
Motion to table?
I'll make that motion to table, Your Worship.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
All in favor? Carried. Bylaw, council procedures bylaw, second reading.
Your worship, the bylaw which has gone through and been reviewed by council and strategic planning and priorities committee, putting this forward in order to move this as our policy, commencing upon third reading of this bylaw. I have not received any further input with respect to the bylaw, and therefore would ask that council commence with second and third readings if they're so inclined.
Mr. Richards.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'd like to make a motion that bylaw 2017-3371, to be known as the City of Weyburn Council Procedures Bylaw, be read a second time.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Discussion? Mr.
I have a question, Your Worship. Yeah, page 17. In order for these people to speak, maybe I'll wait till you get to page 17?
Yep, I'm good.
Yeah. In order for these people to speak, do they have to make an application with the city clerk prior to this, prior to the meeting, or is it open mic type of thing during a council meeting?
It's an open mic during the inquiry session. That first we would ask if there are any inquiries of the members of council, and then we would ask if there are any inquiries of the public or the media, in which case, as the bylaw states, the question must be asked with respect to what occurred during the meeting. It's not an opportunity for debate. It's an ability to ask for clarification with respect to what decisions were made by council earlier in the meeting.
But they wouldn't have to be registered with the
That's
city
right.
clerk?
No, they would not.
They would just have to show
They
up?
would just have to show up and inquiries. The mayor would ask if there are any inquiries from the media or the public, after asking council if there are any inquiries from there.
But only items on that agenda,
Only
right?
items that are on that agenda. And only with respect to clarification. It's not an ability to re-debate.
That's my question.
Yes.
Clear? Okay. Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'd like to make a motion that bylaw 2017-3371, to be known as the City of Weyburn Council Procedures Bylaw, be read the third time and passed.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Call the question. All in favor? Favor. Passed unanimously. That was third and final reading. The bylaw's not. And at this point in time, one of the things in the bylaw was mentioned that we had a youth representative be a part of our council, who is now sitting here in this point in time. We just wish to have, if Mr. Field would come forward to the mic, just introduce himself, and we will bring a chair up beside Mr. Chessel here and have him sit at our table. We'll find a chair. Or what is that? What, pardon me? Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you for letting me speak in front of you all today. And if you do not know me, my name is Landon Field, and recently I was given the honor of becoming Weyburn's first youth member on City Council. This is a non-voting role where, along with my shadow council, we will provide feedback and opinions from young people in Weyburn on how we view decisions. In this position, we will focus on engaging young people and giving them a place to go to make their voices heard and opinions known. As of right now, this trial is going great, and I have been given the privilege of choosing a few students to become the shadow council. At the end of this school year, we will hold a mini nomination period to let the students of Weyburn choose the next batch of people. Our main focuses will be on youth employment, the new multi-purpose center being built, and local attractions. This is an exciting opportunity, and I feel very humbled to start something new in our great city and maybe have the opportunity to make it better. Thank you very much.
Great.
If you wish to bring a chair from the back of the field, and you can sit right here.
And
Sit between Mr. Richards and I.
also with me today is Louise Pasqua, who is a
you wish to
member
come
of the
forward.
Shadow Council as well.
Just come in and say hello, and then you can sit back in the gallery.
First item is the development levy, eh?
What do you think of this?
We can't decide it, eh?
Hi, my name is Louise, and I'm part of the youth or Shadow Council, along with Landon and 3 other more students from Weyburn Comprehensive School. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you again for joining us with the council, and a very historic moment again for our city here. We appreciate you joining us here today. On to old business, we have none. The new business that we have now is our draft budget of 2018, which includes our strategic plan, action plan, capital, and operating budget as such. Mr. Hardy.
Your worship, it is my pleasure to convey to council a draft budget for 2018. Council has been involved in the process over the past couple of months in sort of trying to get our collective willpower together to develop a budget that will see us through 2018. But as part of the process, in terms of working within a new context of development, is we need to know that what we are doing in terms of an annual budget process is consistent and aligns with what we want to achieve as a city. And so, in terms of that. Basically, we have identified some draft strategic priorities, which with council's approval this evening, we will adopt as our strategic priorities and our strategic plan for the coming term of council. And in terms of those corporate strategic priorities, we're basically going to pursue the vision we have of Weyburn, which is Weyburn is an innovative city, steadily growing with diverse people, commerce, and jobs, while maintaining its sense of community, quality of life, fiscal health, and wellness. And to that end, the corporate strategic priorities which are being put in front of council to adopt this evening are basically to pursue that vision that we talked about by maintaining our quality of life among the best cities in the prairies and among the top 10 in Canada, to grow within our available infrastructure to 14,000 population, to seek out a third major economic pillar to support our current strengths in agriculture and the oil industry, to provide a turnkey community for new residents and investors while maintaining the vitality of our existing business sector, and sustaining our legacy as a regional medical center through renewal and specialization. Those are the elements that council has identified as being our long-term strategic vision and priorities for this council. In order to support this, basically we have a series of values that we think are important that we are going to use as our guideposts. Our values are to be confident, resilient, supportive, adaptable to change, and fiscally sound, which we think are the values which have guided this community over the past 100 years and beyond, and will continue to move us forward. Our commitment as a city government is to provide strong public services and demonstrate our civic pride and pride in our work. As a city government, we'll also increase our level of public engagement and involvement, seek more partnerships within our region and community, and communicate more information to residents, visitors, investors, and City Council in order for them to make good decisions. In terms of those strategic priorities and the commitment that we are making as a city government, basically I'm putting in front of Council this evening some 5-year term priorities. In terms of our, over the 5 years, in terms of our 5-year operating and capital priorities, we're looking at the implementing priority-based budgeting. We're going to develop an asset management framework and strategy. We're going to look at renewing our community development plan and zoning bylaws through greater community engagement and involvement. We're looking at reviewing our economic development policies and tax abatement programs in line with these priorities and with regulatory changes that are given to us by the province. And we're going to look at implementing a business process or program review cycle in terms of being able to increase our efficiency and effectiveness and reduce our operating costs. Around the fiscal health priorities, basically what we're looking at is in creating and sustaining a dedicated reserve which would fund these priorities, these long-term priorities that we've talked about, and set a new reserve policy at some sustainable levels, and to start developing multi-year capital, operating, and fiscal health plans. So this is kind of going back and forth on me. So I'm not using this at this point. I'll go back to where we were. I hit the wrong button, exactly. So anyway, on the short term, what we're planning for in the short term, basically, in terms of our operating and capital priorities, is we've identified and put forward a budget that is maintaining current service levels for 2018, with the additions of a regular pavement rehabilitation program and increased support for swim lessons, which is a demand from our youth contingent. We're looking at creating as we said, we're looking at creating those asset management and priority-based budget work plans. We're going to be able to start identifying our programs, our service levels, and start tracking our results. We have put forward for Council's consideration the funding which would move the Recreation and Cultural Centre forward by starting into to the design process, and from there moving into construction, which is something that Council will make in terms of when this occurs. Council will give the go once we're able to provide them with the information coming out of the consultation process that with our existing architects firm. We've basically identified that downtown streetlight replacement is a priority. We're going to explore regional transportation with the Department of Highways and the RM. We put forward a plan to improve City Hall customer service and security improvements, and we're looking at gateway signage approval. So this is what is sort of incurred or developed in terms of our guidelines, in terms of our budget. So I wanted to bring Council's attention to the presentation which is on the slides, and not within your package, because basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about where we stand as a city. We talked about strategic directions. I don't have to go so much into it. I'm going to talk about the budget summary which is in front of you, and I've talked about the challenges which we've had to overcome in putting this draft budget forward. So where we stand, the City of Weyburn has had annual growth of about 1.5% over the last 10 years. This past year, we're on the low side. We're at about 0.5% in 2017. An interesting change in our demographics that we have to adapt to is that 51% of our population are now under 40 years of age. That's a move which is, since the last census, means that we're a growing city and we're a younger city. We are the fifth best place to live in Canada, and we want to continue that way. And here's something that I think is really important for the public to know is that Weyburn's residential municipal tax rate is the second lowest in Saskatchewan. And to give you the numbers that show you that is we looked at the 2016 numbers. So in terms of all the other cities have a 21% higher tax rate than Weyburn. Yorkton is 23% higher. Moose Jaw, a much larger community than us, is 9% higher. Estevan, our regional neighbor, is 8% higher. Regina is 3% higher. And Saskatoon is the only one with lower taxes than us, and we're only 4 points ahead of them. Really important to know that as a city, our tax regime is very effective and is amongst the best in the province. So it's good to know where you stand when you start talking about budget. Now the budget that is in front of you, draft budget that is in front of you, has a capital programs of $20.63 million. In terms of the impact on the municipal taxes, that represents a 4.41% increase. Now, in that capital program are carryover projects, which include our water treatment plant. And in the capital projects we have sort of doubled up on our roads rehabilitation program. We didn't spend some of the money this year, or last year in 2017. We kept it, so we're going to have an enhanced roads rehabilitation program this year. And we have included the design for the Community and Culture Center in our budget, in the draft budget that's in front of you. Around the operating budget, there's only a 1/3% increase. We kept it the minimum. We kept it down to where we could. We have a minimal change in operations. Basically, we're going to work with what we've got and try to keep the same service levels that we have. We don't think that is necessarily going to be an issue based on historical data. So at this point, the draft budget that's being put in front of council has a municipal levy increase, which is normal where people want to know is that what we currently have is a municipal levy increase of 4.74%, which represents about $285,000. But at the same time, as council is aware, there's a list of items that are still on the table, which council has not yet decided yay or nay as to what it wants to do to determine a final tax increase for 2018. The major hurdles that we have overcome in this budget is that we had a provincial funding reduction of $1.2 million over 2017. Now, how have we responded to this? Well, first of all, we tried to cap our operating expenses while maintaining cap those expenses while maintaining service levels. We have reduced our contributions to reserve over historical numbers. And the other thing that we're working on with council and starting to get a better handle on is we're trying to prioritize capital projects. And there are still some capital projects which I believe council has in front of them that they need to make some decisions on as to their being a priority to be funded in this year's budget. So that's where we stand at this point. And in terms of where we go from here, Your Worship, basically, I've identified 3 steps for this evening. If we can achieve these, we will be well on our way to finalizing this budget. We need to basically review and possibly adjust those reserve contributions to reduce the tax, with all the purpose of reducing the existing 4.74 increase in the tax levy. We can review and adjust the capital plan, and it's up $264,000 over 2017. We could adjust the operating plan more, but generally we're flat there. And then, so what I'm asking for council in terms of this evening is a resolution to adopt the capital plan, or at least approve our priority projects going forward so that staff can start getting RFPs out and those types of things so they can move ahead on those while council gets into the fine details. And a resolution, then after doing capital, look at the operating plan, and then basically getting a resolution to finalize and adopt the 2018 budget as a whole. And from there, we'll then commence with discussion on tax rates and utility rates. And my plan is to have a full, wholesome discussion on those at our February 12th council meeting, once the budget generally is set, because we're going to know where we are in terms of the program the council approves. So, Your Worship, this is the point at which I leave it for council. There are some reports within the. There are some reports with respect to certain capital projects that council had asked for information on. Those are included with respect to the fire hall floor from emergency services, information generally on the financing of water and sewer rates and usage. There's a description of the planning and development, how that would move forward. And there is a report on the increased budget in the communications area, and primarily I've provided a breakdown there as to what are staff dollars and what are non-staff dollars and what are they trying to achieve. So with that, Your Worship, the budget is in the hands of council now to do as it pleases.
We're open for questions. Let's start off. Mr. Mickle.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, Manager Roy, you're telling me that the proposal on the board is about a 4.774 increase in the municipal mill rate?
That's correct.
Okay, so rather than going line by line, we'll be here till 2 in the morning. I would suggest that you get it with your professionalism and your administration help, get it down to 2.75. Between 2.75 and 3%. I'll put the onus back to you.
Well, it is a council decision, Councilor Mickle.
Well, that's my decision.
Well, the question though becomes, at a 4.75, what does that basically mean municipally, roughly per household? Roughly.
In terms of a tax increase?
So what is that 4.75 mean per thousand of tax?
I'm going to ask the finance director. She's working on her.
What does that work out per thousand tax?
On assessment?
Yeah, on assessment.
I think it'd probably be around $80.
So
Not for everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
$80
That's the average.
The 4.75?
Yeah.
And a 3% would mean what, $60?
Yeah. So I think that's
So a difference of $20, Dick.
That's
$20 per
people
household,
that are low-income people, that's a lot of money.
$20 over a year, that breaks down to $2 a month, less than $2 a month.
Your Worship, the reason why I'm saying 3% or less is because there's things here we can still cut, and I think we have to do that.
Such
I
as?
will not support a 4.75 increase.
No, just give some such as, what would you think that we should
Well,
cut?
there's a list on the bottom of the page here. There's the fire floor, the leisure floor, the library office, the
Dick.
works floor.
Dick,
There's a few other ones here.
Go ahead.
You can get down to 2% off that pretty quickly.
Well, state it again.
It's
You
right
didn't
there.
have your mic on.
It's on your printout, Your
Yeah.
Worship. Right here.
Yes.
And the city manager's got that.
Yep.
Take all those items out and you're probably under 2, but that's maybe a little expensive, but we can get down to 3% and very easily to do that.
Mr. Richard.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a couple more questions. So at 4.74% increase to the levy, that creates a balanced budget for the city of Weyburn. Yes or no? Yes, thank you. And
That
then
would be a 0% increase if we took that, sorry. The budget as it says is a 4.75% increase.
Correct.
If we reduce that, you can reduce that anywhere
Yes.
down to zero, but
So-
we know that that's not generally.
Absolutely. I just want to be clear
Yeah.
that a 4.74% municipal, easy for me to say, 4.74% municipal levy increase creates a balanced budget based on the forecasted spending for 2018. So that 4.74 is across the board, across all property classes as well. So residential and non-residential,
It is
both.
the average. Those change, those are different depending on how, if you were
Correct.
not to change any of your base taxes,
Yes.
any of your mill rates between classes.
Correct.
If you were to change nothing
Yes.
and keep all of those the same, that's what the increase would be.
Thank
what
you.
the
So
current
that was the
status
road
is.
I was hoping we would get down, is that 4.74 is a percentage increase to the levy.
Correct.
That doesn't necessarily mean it's a 4.74 increase to Landon's house and my warehouse.
Correct.
We still have to debate those figures.
That's correct.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we understand the process. We can approve any number, but at what point, and I can say that I don't know this answer, at what point then do we backfill that 4.74 out of our mill rates?
That's what the next process is. Once you, now, in many cases, council has tried to do both at the same time, and it's ended up, it ends up being a lot of work. What I'm suggesting to council is you approve the program that we're going to go forward with, and then you make the decisions how to fund it by making adjustments to each of those, where you want to, in terms of making any changes to what we currently have in terms of our current rates.
Can I keep going?
Yeah.
Thanks, Your Worship.
One more question, and then we're going to go to Mel.
I would like to see us, I feel personally that's also, I'm with Councillor Mickle, that's hefty enough. I wouldn't mind to see us try to pull that back a percentage or maybe a little bit better. But me personally, I feel the more fulsome conversation, and I hate that word and I'm apologizing for using it, but the more fulsome conversation is where do we get that percentage from? Whether it's commercial, whether we adjust our base tax, whether it's non-residential, residential. There's a lot of factors that make that up.
But should, the question then that I put back to you, should that really impact on what the level of spending, or what is the program that you want to see?
Well,
what's the driver?
Yes. And let me say this to you then. God, I know, I'm sorry. This is why I put it in that way. If we were going to do a large, let's say, upgrade to our water treatment system, which we are, that primarily is accessed by residents.
Right.
By residential dwellings, sorry, is what I should be saying, not so much by commercial entities.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So although I 100% support what you've laid out for us here in terms of these are the priorities, let's not start with where do we cut, let's start with where do we want to spend. Thank you for doing that. But I think we have to make sure that we tie that properly to where we're going to take it from. I just want to be sure that we all understand, because I wouldn't have understood this prior to reading this 9,000-page thing that you and Laura put together for us, that 4.74 is to the levy, not to my house.
That's correct. Correct.
Thank you. I'll stop now.
Ms. Bembetcher.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing clarity to that, Mr. Richards.
Would you like me to go around one more time?
No, thank you. The increase, to me, it's what are you getting for your dollar? I can live with an 8% increase if I knew what I was getting was valuable to me. If it's not, then 2% might be too much. I'm still stuck in between our old process and the new process, I'll be honest. We want to pick what we want and then choose if we can afford it, I think is probably the process. And personally, I'm not there yet. I haven't had a chance to review it enough yet to be able to get my head wrapped around the new process and the old process. I still like looking at the 9,000 pages and trying to look through and figure out from last year's budget to this year's budget and everything else. But as they say, as far as the increase goes, to me, that is, that's where our priority-based budget comes in, is you pick your priorities. If it requires a 5% increase, then it requires a 5% increase. If there's some priorities we think that can be put off, then maybe we can get down to 2 or 3%. But we're not going to cut something just for the sake of saving dollars. We have to decide whether we want that or we don't want that. Unfortunately, I'm not there yet as far as myself looking at the budget.
Mr. Bailey, you're studying
It takes me a long time to study it, Your
You're studying the
Worship.
bottom line as to which
Yeah.
projects to cut in the priority-based budgeting?
Well, I've gone through it and have check marks beside questions and answers, and I don't think tonight's the time to bring this up. What you're asking us tonight, here's the basic, then we go back and fine tune it. So we're not voting on it, a 4.74 budget tonight and passing it. We're voting on the concept of this, and then going back in to fine check some of these check marks that I have here to say, can we or can't we? I like the priority based. If it's a 5% increase that we need to supply to our service, to our taxpayers, so be it. I don't want it, but it might have to happen one year. To go year after year after year and say, we got to be under 3%, it's not a realistic thing, because we have extra expenditures some years that we can't do without. And so let's get into this and do that line by line almost, or look at things where we can come down from that if need be. So I don't think that's here tonight to do, Your Worship, or is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
Oh,
and ask him.
then I'm going to take more time than Councillor
go ahead.
Richards does. So,
Well, but make your couple suggestions. I ask you, make a couple suggestions of what projects you'd cut.
well, I haven't got that far, to be honest with you.
But
I
not
just
the
have-
line-by-line thing. I'm
No.
talking about these priority-based, these priorities there. As they said, you had the fire hall floor, you had, what is the other ones onto that?
Your Worship, I can just talk to a couple of these things,
Okay.
because I think they might need a little bit more clarity yet. So the number one item on there is the interest transfer to reserves.
Yes.
That item alone has a significant impact here. That's that's written pretty small for these old guys, but I'm going to say it's about 350,000.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you've got an old one there.
That's good, because my eyes are also old. But it doesn't take a lot to have an impact on those
Yeah.
projects.
Yes.
So we've talked a lot about priority-based budgeting. We've also understood that this is a year when the provincial economy is going to have a massive impact on our economy, or our budget anyways, I should say, and our economy. So something like an interest transfer to reserves is something that straight off, for me, seems like a no-brainer. We should not be doing that. And I think that's money we can cut straight off the top. Is that the answers you're looking for? And I apologize, I think a lot of us, Roy, are unfamiliar with the process you put forward today.
Yeah, and I guess part of the process, and I understand the concern of councillors who have been here for a long period of time and have gone through the process of managing the budget by looking at it line by line. And the issue is that council always has that responsibility to be the watchdog of the public purse. But the question at the end of the day is, from my perspective, is, if council is generally approving the program or the service level or the things that we're trying to achieve, and staff have budgeted it, then the question is at what point does council end up trying to do the city manager or the finance manager's job in bringing a budget forward? What they should be doing is they should be questioning the expenditures and as making the determination as to whether or not they are a priority. And you authorize staff to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in the performance of their duties. yet we have counselors looking at $750 lines and making decisions based on the $750 lines. Council needs to get itself out of trying to be the finance manager and to be the council which says we've got the right directions and generally we understand what it is that we want to do and generally we want to see this overall council direction. But at the end of the day, what I've really done here is I've given you a budget here that is based on what staff would like to see, based on also some discussions that we've had with council, and saying, you know, I've identified $300,000 of potential adjustments that council just needs to make the decision on. Right? We've gone to the level of saying, here are some basic things. Do you want to see these go forward or not? And by making some decisions that way, what council's doing is it's not doing the job of counting pencils. It's concerned about it's concerned about the direction that we're in and doing the things that we need to do.
Mr. Chessel. Mr. Chessel and then Mr.
Your Worship, Roy, I totally agree. I guess we had somewhat of that discussion today when you and I were chatting, Roy, but I guess from my perspective, you have summed it up on the bottom of the page. I didn't take time going line by line, nor do I honestly want to, because that's not my job. That's the manager's job. I do see some potential items that maybe aren't a priority, that were a priority for our manager, maybe not a priority for council. And, you know, just looking at it, there's easily $150,000 roughly out of that where you have possibly areas for savings that could get us down to that 2.4 with still a great program going into 2018.
Mr. Richards.
Thanks, Your Worship. And yeah, let me be clear, City Manager. I totally 100% behind what you're doing. We just, as council, though, have been put into a different position than we did last year, and I'm guessing a number of years going forward or going backwards. So we said, and we did support the priorities. Right? We helped develop the priorities. You said to your senior management team, go and make this happen. They came back and said, this is what it's going to cost. So what Councillor Mickle did right off the hop is to say, that's just a little bit more than we're willing to spend for it, though. Can we spend a little bit less? Now, what he's saying there, if I may be so bold, because I agree with him, is that's not up to us, like Councillor Chessel just said, to go through line by line and find that couple of percent. Because I don't know how much...
No. And I agree with you.
So I just wanted to be clear. That's not what we were saying at all.
And so in taking what you said, and I understand the point that I've got in terms of the draft budget here, I've identified the projects that you can cut to make those, and instead of having to go through a line by line type of thing, because these are where council was split on, was this a priority to fund this year or not?
Correct.
And if you make adjustments to those, I think you can get to where council is happy with the program and can move from there.
Mr. Mickle.
Thank you, Worship. To finance, Laura, if we have to, or want to cut 2%, how much is that in dollars that we have to? Give me some numbers. How much?
120,000.
About 120.
It's foundable right there. I mean,
Yeah.
Councillor Chessel and I just found it in a conversation across the table.
Then what is it? What are your suggestions? I'm asking for suggestions.
Well, okay, you gonna read them off here? Here they are. Read them on the bottom.
Sure, Councillor Mickle. Some of the projects were the software savings by using existing for the urban forestry.
15,000.
I still agree we continue with the $50,000 with the downtown streetlights, not drop that to 25, keep that at 50. 7th Street West replacement for storm sewer. That's been an ongoing project. Aerator assessment, continue with that. Police sign, I believe, wasn't there also some work already done there for that $2,000? That's pretty minor.
That was all.
Continue with the fire floor, and maybe there's some work that can be done that can be even shaved down a little more, and take a real strong look at the leisure floor and the works floor. So. which that roughly that took us down roughly 130, 124, which is about a 2.4. So.
Mr. Wheeler?
Thanks, Your Worship. No.
No. There we go.
Thanks for putting this together, Manager Roy. I think I'm on the same page as Mr. Chessel over there. I'm not about to go through this budget line by line. That's not my job. We have fully competent people working for the city, and I think it's about time we started trusting them. If we want to mandate them to come in at 2% less, I think we just make the motion that that's what they do and leave it up to each department head to come forward with their ideas. They know what our priorities are, and if we put it to them to come back with a 2% increase, that's what they're required to do. I don't think it's unrealistic going to a 4.7% increase. I think Mr. Hardy made that quite clear. We are one of the lowest taxed communities in the province, and I think we need to be proud of that. But we also need to understand that if we want good things, amenities for the people of Weyburn, we have to be prepared to pay for it. It is lean times provincially. Hopefully we'll be coming out of that, and hopefully some of that government funding will be coming back. But in the meantime, I think we need to do whatever we have to keep moving forward and not become stagnant. 0.5% growth rate for 2017 or 2016, that's not bad, all things considered. We lost a lot of workers as a result of the slowdown in the oil industry, and hopefully that's coming back around. But I'm happy with the budget. I'd like to see it come down a little bit further, but I don't think it's unrealistic to go forward with the increase that we have in place right now. A lot of cities last year put in 7, 8, 9, 10% increases. We went 3.5. This year we want to go 4.7. There's other communities doing 9, again 13 this year. So I don't think it's unrealistic in this time to have an increase. We'd like to minimize it if at all possible, and I think we need to look at all the options we have, but I think the city's done an outstanding job coming forward with this budget. I think we need to work with them, and maybe if we can cut a little bit here, cut a little bit there, I think that's what we need to do.
Mr. Van Betcher?
Yes, thank you. I don't disagree, but I think you're all wrong when you say you don't have to understand the budget. If Mr. Resident comes up and asks you, what are we spending $100,000 on here? Not $700. We're talking a lot more zeros than what's on $700. Someone comes up and asks you what we're spending $100,000 on. How come we're spending $200,000 more on this than last year? And you can't answer that question? I think that's a problem. All I'm saying is we need more time to trust the process. It's got nothing to do with trusting the staff, it's trusting the process. And I don't think we've had enough time to look this over and digest it. And I think if you're saying that you don't need to know what's in this budget, I think you're not representing the people of this city properly. Because I think you have to know it in more detail than to just say, yeah, go ahead. Whatever you want, go ahead, do it. I think you have to understand it better.
Yeah, I think we agree to disagree on this, Mr. Van Betcher. I think we do have people that are competent. If people are asking for the fine details of the budget, there are people within the city that can answer those questions. It's not my full-time job. Being an accountant, that's a full-time position. I don't have an accreditation in accounting, so I'm not going to say I'm an expert in budget. It's important that we understand the budget process, but the fine details of it, we should leave that up to the people that do that for a living, I believe.
Mr. Mickle?
One more comment. First of all, I want to thank the administration for bringing this document. Roy, it was good reading material, and yes, I go line by line. I've always done that. Anyway, all the information you've given us, it's there. You're saying 4.75, that's a fair statement, and we're saying, no, we want to go 2.75 or 3. And you've also given us that information to cut. I think you've done your homework. If that's the direction that we give our administration, bring us back and get us in the 2.7, 3% range. It's very simple, gentlemen. let's not make it complicated. He's done a lot of work with his staff, and he's given us information where the cuts can be made. It's up to us to do that.
I would just want to make a comment. You said that you wanted to see a 3-point. He said that he's happy with the 4.7. So let's make sure. So with that comment in making that comment, I have to ask what each one of you is happy at. Are you happy at a 4.7 increase, or do you want to see a 3% so we can give Mr. Hardy direction so he can come back to us? And we have to ask this around the table. Mr. Van Betju.
As I said before, I'm not prepared to make that amount because I haven't had a chance to review it for enough time, so I don't understand it enough. So I have no comment on it.
Mr. Wheeler.
I think we need to look at some of the optional things that they put forward, like Mr. Chessel has mentioned, and if we can reduce the increase slightly, I think we need to look at that, but I think there might be a little bit of room, but I would be more than happy, not happy, but I would settle for the current budget the way it stands.
Mr. Bailey?
Thank you, Your Worship. I still, like Councillor Mickler, has only seen these on a line-by-line basis, and I have done some work on doing that, have some questions to discuss. I like Councillor Van Vetju's statement of, and I do agree with that, if it's 4 or 5% that we need to spend and it has to be done, let's do it. Can we cut back? We can cut back probably and find that minimal percent. If you took an average home in Weyburn, I believe the average home prices are around $275,000 for an average home in Weyburn. So if you took that, Laura can maybe correct me, it would be about a $50 a year increase in taxation.
At 4.7.
Yeah, correct. So if that number is right, I can live with that. I think we can live with that. But in the same token, if our manager can go back and say to us, let's leave this off, we can work with this and make it a higher priority next year, then let's do it. They do it. I don't want to go line by line because that's hard. And you don't know the backgrounds to some of this. I looked at some of the insurance costs here that we're insuring bare land. And I'm going, what are we insuring bare land for? And it's only a $15,000 insurance policy. Do we need to do it? That's not my job to decide. But there's a question there of why we're doing it. Yeah. Okay. Did I answer it? Yes. Where I stand? Am I on the fence?
Yes.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm going to kind of say the same thing that you're hearing. Except that I'm not comfortable really at a 5% or 4 3/4% tax increase unless I can really show. Then I'll go back to what Councillor Van Betju said. I need to very much understand this when these guys just cut 2% off with some napkin math on the side of the table, right? So again, I'm not going to support any number for a number of reasons, because if it needs to be 4.74, then make it 4.74, but I need to understand that. Secondly, I need to understand where we're going to get the 4.74 from, because again, there's a lot of fluctuation that can happen between residential and non-residential that we haven't even started to talk about. No answer, sorry. 3.
3, okay, 3. Mr. Chessel.
I guess number-wise, I'm trying not to base it off numbers. I'm trying to base it off priorities, because if that's how we're doing this, let's decide our priorities. If we can get our priorities down and that number comes down to under 3, I would prefer that. We've been, I still like that 2 to 2.5. There's still discussion need to be have on water this year. We just had the increase for our recycling program. So yes, it may only be $50, but if we can change some of our priorities to make that less of a hit for our residents, because if we want to have bigger projects coming down the road, we may eventually have to do a 5 or 6 or 7%. So if it's not 100% necessary with our priorities now, then I would like to see a lower increase.
Yes, Your Worship, I would support a, between 2.75 and 3%, I would vote yes. And there's room to cut.
What my comment is on here is back to what you had said, Mr. Bueller. If we need to, for the quality of what we're doing here, we want to do a 4.75, then we have to do it. If some of those things, priorities that you had set at the bottom line, I don't think we should be going line by line, but we as council should only be looking at these basic priorities that were laid out by Mr. Hardy at the end. Those are our choices that we have to say, are those priorities or are they not? And then I'm going to throw this one back at the council in the idea that if we're quibbling over doing from 3% to a 2.75 to 3%, and yet can we look at our community and say we're going to give $1 million to the golf course at 0% increase rate for 45 years, and then quibbling about your percentage having to do and only do a couple percent increase is again, let's get our priorities. The point I'm asking the council is very generally, get your priorities straight as to which direction we want to go. Are these things important at the bottom line that Mr. Hardy has identified, or are they not? And that's what we're going to have to come back to Mr. Hardy and give him to him these directions at the end on there, right? Did that answer any questions, Mr. Hardy?
No, I think it's...
Are you hiding your head?
It tells me that council is not prepared to come to a conclusion on its own, that it is relying on staff to do that. I have, indicated to council that, when we've had strategic planning, I've said, when council is not willing to make a decision, staff will make it for them. But don't question staff later on, afterwards, in terms of the implementation, when you've given it the power to us to make the decision.
And I guess that's what it gets down to, and I guess I asked this of the council members, that of those priorities that are set out there at the bottom, you're going to have to make a decision. Which ones do you want to cut, and you're going to vote on each one of those. Are you going to cut them, are you going to keep them in, or not? Mr. Richard.
Thanks, Your Worship. I think very quickly we better take this to a separate discussion, or we're going to be here all night. Okay. Number two, clearly, we don't have a very clear understanding of this process yet as a council, and I think we need some time to have this spelled out a little bit better for us, because I feel like we did sort of say the answer, right? That we feel these are things that can be peeled out based on staff's recommendation.
But there wasn't a consensus among council on which of these should go, which of these should be made. And that's to you, Your Worship, is what I'm suggesting is that it's council who needs to make these decisions, given staff has given them everything in terms of where the options are to look at, and in terms of the program as to where adjustments can be made.
Right. I agree.
We've done our job short of basically making the decision ourselves.
So that's what I said, that each one of those lines in there, are you for it or against it, and vote on that. Mr.
Well, I will stop right here then. Sorry, thanks, Your Worship. Then I would ask that right at this moment, if this is the decision we need to make, that staff could walk us through each one of these things, make sure we fully understand them, make sure that the figures we have in front of us are correct, because the one I have isn't, I think.
Yeah, well,
make sure that
that's an old piece of paper that was on your desk for a while.
Make sure that the figures we have are correct and what the impact of them is, should we strike them from the budget.
Okay, let's start in. Line 1. Laura, what is line 1? Line 1 of the ones, these are the things that are identified by staff that can be cut or can be left in. And once we say yay or nay on them, whatever the percentage increase is, that is what the percentage increase is.
We can keep a running tab.
We can keep a running tab. All right. And basically you said you have to count 150,000?
If you're in that area.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So historically, we've transferred any interest that we've received on GICs or on our bank account to reserves for future, and we've reduced that to 100,000 to this year. Historically, it's been about 500,000, but because of all the cuts we've had from the government, we chose to only
So we could cut,
100,000. So you could cut it all,
You
yes.
could cut it all, 100,000,
Yep.
right there, boom, 100,000, and we're down, and the interest that we're getting
They're
from
putting it into
GSEs.
reserves.
Instead of putting it in reserves, just cut the 100,000 from that, and not put it into reserves.
I don't agree with that.
I don't agree with that.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go around the table. We'll start off. Mr. Mickle, you
Leave
don't
it in.
agree?
Leave it in.
Leave it in.
Mr. Leave it in?
Yeah, leave it in, sorry.
Mr. Bambatchu,
You're not going to like my answer.
go ahead, answer.
I think the process is flawed. I'm making a decision on $100,000, and I don't know what the rest of the budget is, what's going on in the rest of the budget. So you want me to decide on a $100,000 item when I don't know what's contained in the rest of the budget? Are we going to change our mind? Oh, maybe I will take that, but I'll take this out.
Okay, then, right. Okay, let's go
I
through
think-
each one of those.
I don't have a problem with the budget, I just have the problem with the timing. I think we haven't had enough time to digest it. We got this Thursday. It's 105 pages, and we got it Thursday. And we're supposed to make a decision on it tonight. And now you want to go line by line and decide on a $100,000 budget at the top. And a little while later, we'll be at a $200,000 budget. A little later, we'll be at a $300,000 or a $50,000, but you don't know the whole budget. I don't know how you can make those decisions based on that. So no, I'm not making a decision on it.
Okay. Ms. Wheeler,
I think it should be left in. Underground.
Mr. Bailey,
I have a hard time making a decision, I'm having a hard time making a decision on it also. To go line by line, I agree. I spent 4 or 5 hours on this, and I'm not knowledgeable enough to know what that $100,000 is, or what's it mean to the overall operation. I kind of agree with Mel that we need some more time.
what, you two people feel you need more time? How much time?
Next, but like I said, 3 or 4 days is not enough. Whether we go to strategic planning and discuss it through there with more open dialogue, or we get more time to look it over.
So basically, how many items, again, refresh my memory, how many items is there at the bottom that could be cut, possibly, to change? That the staff have identified. Again, we're not going through, we're not going line by line. And that is what, Mel, that's what we're not doing. We're not doing line by line. There's nine different things. So there's 9 items. So let's start this back again. There's, Laura, read those 9 items off. $100,000 for the interest?
For interest. There's 15,000 for a software system for urban forestry. Reduce the downtown lighting project from 75,000 to 25,000. The 7th Street West replacement of the storm sewer, reduce that by 40,000. The aerator assessment would be reduced by 20,000, and then there's facility repairs and maintenance. And they total 170. So there's a sign at the police station, the fire floor, the library office, and the leisure floor, and then the public works flooring. And those add up to 170,000.
Mr. Hardy.
Your worship, if I can just provide a bit of clarity. The items that are on this list are the items that staff have identified. If there were to be further cuts made, where would you make them? This is the list of cuts that staff have identified. They're also the list of things that we have put in front of council and had 1, 2, 3, 4 budget meetings on what is in the projects. Each council member has been briefed, has had the ability to ask questions of staff at the high level of what are their projects that are doing, what are they doing around the provision of their operating budgets, what are they changing. All of these elements have been subject of budget meetings that we've had since this process was initiated. And so what is in front of council now is a set of staff recommendations to look at. And basically we're saying is that getting to where we are today is that we are putting in front of you a 4.74% increased budget. But if you want to identify where further cuts can be made, this is the list of those cuts which are there. If council does not want to go outside of these cuts or has any cuts outside of that, yes, it's up to council to identify those. And so the question is, if councilors want to take the time to look at the detailed budget to see if there's anything that isn't there, I think the staff have fairly represented what it is that they've been trying to achieve. And at a governance level, basically, they've provided council with enough information, I believe, to make decisions. And if there is further information that is not here, then please let us know what that is. Because what we have been trying to do through this process is provide council with the information to make a good decision. And if what council is saying is that we haven't given them enough information, then please let us know what that is. Because yes, this is a different way of doing budget, but it's also focusing on making sure that what we're doing is our priorities, and that you, council, has better information in terms of what it is that we're trying to achieve as staff. And the question at the end of the day is, if asked, these are the cuts that, if you're going to still want to be talking about cuts as opposed to priorities, these are the areas which council can look at, and council can make some decisions. Staff have gone to the nth level of providing council with the information it needs to make decisions.
It's all here.
It's all here.
Mr. Bailey.
It's all here.
Manager Roy, in my terms on council, this has been explained to me far better than I've ever understood it. So thank you for that. The previous meetings were enlightening. We started at the front, and I have grasped way more, okay? The issue, and I'm not afraid of a 4.74 increase if that's what we need to do priorities. That's the learning curve that some of us haven't fell into yet, I guess, and I speak for myself. Mm-hmm. We've always gone through, here it is in the big picture, we take this out, and we made their target of 2.75%. If it's important to pass it, the first year I was on council, we never passed the budget until July of that year. And so to be at this stage on the 8th of January is fantastic. And full credit to yourself, and that's what this council said to you. We need this by this time frame, and it fell together. So thank you for that.
So we're talking, so this is what it is, councilors, that we are talking, that we have gone, and Mr. Van Betcher, I'm saying again, we have gone, we're not going line by line. The staff have gone line by line. This bottom box, those are the areas for possible savings. And we're going to go through those again. What are those possible, what of those 7 items do you want cut out?
I appreciate what our city manager has said. We've gone through this 3-4 times, but this is the first time we've had it all compiled together with the breakdown. I still don't understand it. I don't think we've passed a police budget yet, if I'm correct in saying that.
No, the police budget is in. The police budget is in here.
But it has to be passed as a separate item.
Yes, it does.
And I'm just asking for another little bit of time to look it over, just before we make these big decisions.
Mr. Richards?
Thanks, Your Worship. I wonder if we could, I don't know that I 100% agree with Councillor Van Betju in that I need to understand every page of every department's budget, because I never will, to be honest with you. But I want to make sure, I feel like there's some folks around the table that aren't comfortable with where we're at right now. And I don't want to be responsible for that. And I don't think you do either. So I'm asking you, Manager Hardy, Is there a way that we can have a separate conversation? And again, this is a new process. None of us have been exposed to before. For us new guys, us young guys, I'd like to say, you know what, maybe it's a little easier for us to digest, but maybe not, right? So for some of the guys that have been through this 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, this is confusing.
Mr. Hardy.
Through you, Your Worship. I did indicate when I started this meeting that my intent was to get you to the point of being ready to make some decisions. In failing us to pass a budget today, I'm fine with that. We can spend part of the next council meeting, open council meeting, to have discussion and debate on what further adjustments can be made to this budget at the next council meeting. One of the things that I said in the absence of getting your direction is what I would like council to do is to give us the ability to go forward on those major capital projects so that we can get those moving, so that we can basically just have a motion that allows the top 5 capital projects to go forward. And I'm not doing anything nefarious here. It's basically, we've got an RFP ready to go out on a project. Can we go forward with it? You know, in other words, can we make sure we get the best price we can? And that's what happens when budgets get extended. All of a sudden, your price gets at the end of the line and you pay more as a result of that. I would just like to have direction from council for the city manager to approve staff moving forward on putting forward requests for proposals or requests for quotations with respect to these capital projects. And that in that way, we can focus on this. And in the meantime, my suggestion would be that if councillors still have any questions about this, that they speak to staff specifically about them and get their questions answered. And we'll give you the best information that we have with a view to trying to get a budget in place, a program in place. And then we have the subsequent discussion of how those costs are going to be redistributed through the tax system.
Mr. Richard.
Thanks, Your Worship. Thank you, City Manager Hardy. That's good. So, do you need a motion to go ahead with those capital projects, or do you just need a nod of the head?
I would like a motion
So can we set a threshold? So let me say this to you. Could we make a motion tonight, and I don't know how but that all proposed capital projects in excess of $500,000
right,
be given approval
to move forward.
To move forward.
Not to make decisions on them, but to
so
start
that
the
staff be
process.
given approval to move ahead on all proposed capital projects in excess of $500,000.
Correct. That would be wonderful.
And I would second that for you, if that's just what you did.
I would look to the city clerk to see if I actually just made that motion. I did make that motion.
And discussion? Mr. Van Betju, of course.
I'm not understanding why the $500,000 for one.
I arbitrarily chose a number that would be in excess of anything that was on this list at the bottom of the page.
So anything
in excess of 500,000, so it would be major capital.
Is that too low, is that too high, Mr. Hardy?
I'm basically anything that, Nader, is there anything that is above? Or below that?
Below 500,000?
Below, like, you know, we are looking for changing those culverts under Highway 39. I was in a meeting with the Ministry of Highways today, and they are planning to submit a request for proposal for doing some stripping for the asphalt between.
So there are some minor things, but basically that culvert project, while we've got highways, we want to be able to move that one forward.
Yeah, this one is around $100,000.
So then I would just suggest, Mr. Richards, would you just say to go ahead with all possible projects that are not in that,
that are not time sensitive,
there's not time sensitive in that box there.
or only that are only time sensitive.
No, I wouldn't say time sensitive because that's arbitrary.
Yeah,
But
How about we said, because there's nothing on here
yeah,
and nothing individually on here
yeah,
worth in excess of $100,000.
that's correct, yes.
So if the clerk would allow me to amend that motion to say $100,000 instead of $500,000, I promise I'll shut my mic off for the rest of the night.
And I'll second his amended motion.
Is it off now?
It is off, Councilor.
Mr. Van Besch?
I won't shut my mic off. And I'm pretty sure that this won't be included in that, but that does not include the design architecture.
No,
for the-
I understand that that's
that
one that we have to have fuller discussions on
hasn't
before we
been
move
made.
that one
Okay.
forward. That's
Thank you.
correct.
All in favor? With that, 100,000, yeah. Carried unanimously. Very good. It helps. And with that, we are completed our new business. Is that is all? Inquiries and announcements?
Yep.
Is there any inquiries from the floor and the reporters? Everyone's. Yes, we've got a long 5 hour. The one inquiry, Mr. Hardy, up on the, can you just give us an update of that project on South Hill on that there?
Yes, Your Worship, the South Hill development is moving forward. We've been working with the developer in completing the 2 existing residences that are there, and I know that the inspector was going to do final inspections this week. There's also been completion of some other infrastructure changes that needed to be made, and I know that in discussions with the developer that he is going to come back with a plan in the spring for council in terms of looking at what sort of the next steps are going to be with respect to that development. But so we're on track and moving forward in that development.
Okay, very good. The one thing I have to apologize, we have to go back to the new business. Could we get a motion to place this budget discussion over to next January 22nd meeting, please? Table it to January 22nd?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
I guess I'll second that, Your Worship.
All in favor? Carried unanimously. There are no notice of motion, no committee of whole, and with that, I thank our council members, our members of the media, and our members of staff for their time, and you, the citizens at home, for watching us. We did have quite an extended meeting here. I call this meeting adjourned.